Is there anyone left who hasn't heard of the novel Frankenstein? Victor Frankenstein, the mad scientist, bringing a monster to life with electricity. But what if I told you this isn't just a fictional novel, but was inspired by the life of someone who actually lived? Have you ever heard the name Giovanni Aldini? If you haven't, that's normal, because this man was so terrifying in his actions that history tried to hide him away. January 18th, 1803, London, Newgate Prison. A hall full of people watches in horror. On the stage are Giovanni Aldini and a corpse, and that corpse is moving. Its eyes open, its jaw quivers, its face contorts, as if it were alive. A gentleman faints, a few scream and bolt from the hall. "This is the devil's work," they cry. And the man on stage, Giovanni Aldini, calmly increases the electrical voltage. This is a true story. And this is where Frankenstein begins. In 1762, a baby was born in Bologna, Italy. His name was Giovanni Aldini. His family was wealthy and educated. But most importantly, there was a very famous man in his family, his uncle, Luigi Galvani. Luigi Galvani was a professor of anatomy at the University of Bologna. He was a famous surgeon. But a discovery he made in 1780 would change everything. One night, Galvani was working in his laboratory. There was a storm outside. Lightning was flashing. On the table were dissected frog legs. Galvani took a copper hook and touched it to the frog's nerve tissue. And at that moment, something startling happened. The frog's leg jumped. The leg of the dead frog moved as if it were alive. Galvani was shocked. He repeated the experiment. It happened again. He tried it with different frogs. The same thing happened in all of them. And Galvani reached a conclusion. Electricity is the source of life. He called this the theory of animal electricity. His claim was this: there is a natural electricity in all living creatures. This electricity moves the muscles, works the heart, and operates the brain. In other words, life consists of electricity. So what did this mean? If life is electricity, then could you reanimate the dead with electricity? Young Giovanni witnessed this discovery of his uncle. He was 18 at the time, studying medicine, and he fully believed in his uncle's theory. The great scientific feud, but Galvani had a problem. Another scientist challenged him. Alessandro Volta. Volta said, "No, electricity does not come from animals. Electricity comes from metals. When you combine copper and iron, electricity is formed. The frog's leg is merely a conductor." And so began a great scientific fight, Galvani versus Volta. They argued for years. They conducted experiments. And in the end, Volta won. The scientific world agreed with Volta. In 1800, Volta invented the voltaic pile, the battery, and proved that electricity came from metals. That could be the subject of another video. Galvani was crushed. He fell into depression. In 1798, at the age of 61, he died of a broken heart. But did his legacy die? No, because he had his nephew, Giovanni Aldini. After his uncle's death, Aldini made a vow. "I will prove my uncle was right. I will show the entire world that electricity gives life." But Aldini was very different from his uncle. Galvani was a quiet, humble scientist. He worked in his lab and did his experiments silently. Aldini, on the other hand, was a showman. He was dramatic. He loved crowds. He loved fame. In the novel, Victor Frankenstein works in secret and tells no one. In this regard, we can say he is more like Galvani. In 1802, Aldini went on a European tour. The mission: to introduce galvanism, the theory of reanimation via electricity, to the public. His first stop was the small cities of Italy. He held public demonstrations. He brought animal carcasses and applied electricity. The muscles moved. People were terrified. But this was not enough for Aldini. He wanted more. He held a demonstration in Bologna. He brought 2 severed human heads. Yes, you heard that right. The heads of 2 executed criminals. He placed the heads on the table, positioned the electrodes, and applied electricity, and what happened? The facial muscles in the heads contorted, brows furrowed, lips puckered, as if they were in pain. The audience watched in horror. Some fled. Some felt like they were going to vomit. Aldini was pleased, because this was exactly what he wanted, terror. Then he went to Paris. There, he went even further. He brought a headless human torso. He attached an electrode to the arm and applied electricity. The hand moved, the fist clenched, then the hand opened. Aldini placed a coin in the hand. He applied electricity. The hand closed, gripping the coin. Then Aldini cut the power. The hand opened, and the coin flew into the air. The audience went wild. "This is a miracle," some said. "This is the devil's work," said others. But Aldini's real goal was elsewhere, London. Because London was the scientific capital of the world, the Royal Society was there. The most famous scientists were there. If he could convince London, he could convince the world. He arrived in London in late 1802. He met with the Royal College of Surgeons. He made his offer. "I want to perform the greatest galvanism experiment on a human corpse." In public, before the eyes of the scientific world, the surgeons accepted. But there was one condition. The body had to be very fresh. Electrical experiments only worked on fresh corpses. Within a few hours, muscle tissues would begin to deteriorate. And this is where the story takes a dark turn. There was a man named George Forster. He was 26 years old. He was a poor man with a wife, Jane, and a small baby. In December 1802, a terrible event occurred. Jane Forster and the baby were found dead in the River Thames. They had drowned. George Forster was arrested. The charge: murdering his wife and baby. But the situation was suspicious. The evidence was weak. Jane Forster suffered from depression and could have committed suicide. There was no definitive proof that George had killed them. Nevertheless, he was tried. And something strange happened. The trial moved very quickly. Normally, such cases would last months. But the Forster case lasted only a few weeks. Why? Some historians say it was because Aldini wanted a fresh corpse, and the court knew this. Is this true? There is no proof, but the timing is suspicious. In January 1803, the verdict was reached. Execution by hanging. Forster was desperate. In prison, he did something. He tried to cut himself with a knife because he was afraid. He was afraid of one thing in particular. At that time, the bodies of hanged criminals were given to surgeons for dissection. And there was a legend. Sometimes corpses woke up during dissection. It was rare, but it happened. Some of the hanged didn't die completely, they just fainted. Then, when the dissection began, they woke up in agony. Forster tried to commit suicide with this fear. "I don't want to wake up when they start cutting me," he said. But he failed. The guards stopped him. January 18th, 1803, morning. A crowd gathered in the courtyard of Newgate Prison. Executions were public in those days. It was entertainment. It was a show. George Forster was led to the gallows. The rope was placed around his neck. His final words were not recorded. Maybe he said nothing. Maybe he cried. The rope was pulled. His body dropped. Within a few minutes, he was motionless. They waited 1 hour. They took the body down 1 hour after hanging it because he had to be certainly dead. Then they put the body in a carriage and took it to the Royal College of Surgeons. Aldini was waiting there. The hall had been prepared. There was a large table in the middle. There were rows of seats around it, just like a theater. The spectators had arrived. Doctors, surgeons, scientists, and the curious. About 80 to 100 people. Everyone was waiting with anticipation. What will happen today? Aldini appeared calm. He prepared his equipment. The voltaic piles, the electrodes, the wires. It was 2 p.m. Forster's body was brought in. It was naked. It was laid on the table. Aldini turned to the spectators and gave a short speech. "Gentlemen, today we shall see the power of galvanism. I will prove that electricity is the source of life. My uncle Luigi Galvani was right, and I will prove it to you." Then he got to work. Aldini took small electrodes and placed them in Forster's ears. He activated the voltaic pile. Electricity flowed. And at that moment, Forster's jaw quivered. The spectators held their breath. What happened just now? Aldini increased the electrical voltage. The jaw quivered more. It moved up and down. It was as if he were trying to speak. The spectators were terrified. Is he alive? No, he was dead. Only the muscles were contracting. Aldini placed the electrodes on Forster's face, one on the forehead, the other on the jaw. He applied electricity. Forster's face contorted. The lines on his forehead became prominent. His brows furrowed. Then, his left eye opened. The spectators screamed. A woman fainted. The eye was looking at them, empty, lifeless, but open. Aldini cut the electricity. The eye closed. A doctor stood up. This is the work of the devil. Stop this. But Aldini did not stop. This was the most shocking one. Aldini placed one electrode on Forster's heart and the other in the rectum. Yes, you heard right. In the rectum. He applied electricity, high voltage, and Forster's body rose. It lifted off its back. The legs contracted. It was as if he were sitting up. The right arm rose. The fist clenched. The audience went wild. A few left the hall. A gentleman fainted and fell to the floor, breaking his jaw. Forster's body remained in that position for a few seconds. Then Aldini cut the electricity. The body fell back onto the table. There was silence. No one was speaking. Everyone was in shock. Aldini waited. Then he asked, "Are there any other questions?" A doctor stood up. His voice was trembling. Did you bring him back to life?" Aldini replied, "No, he is still dead. But I moved the muscles with electricity, because electricity is the power of life." Another doctor asked, "What if you had given more electricity? What if you had applied it for a longer time? Would he have come back to life?" Aldini paused. Then he said, "Perhaps. But that is enough for today." The birth of Mary Shelley's monster. In the novel Frankenstein, Victor fully reanimates his creature. The heart beats, the eyes open, it breathes. Aldini, however, could only move the muscles. But it was scary enough, wasn't it? Aldini, however, could only move the muscles, but it was scary enough, wasn't it? The experiment ended. Forster's body was buried. Aldini packed his equipment. The next day, newspapers wrote with horror. Electrical reanimation shocks London. Some newspapers praised it, the miracles of science. Others cursed it. A sin against God, Aldini became famous. But he was controversial. Some doctors admired him. Others saw him as a charlatan. How did Aldini feel? We don't know. But in the following years, he performed more experiments. Dogs, cats, and more human corpses. But none became as famous as the Forster experiment. Over time, the theory of galvanism was debunked. The scientific world agreed with Volta. Electricity was not animal. It was chemical. Aldini believed in it until he died. He died in 1834 at the age of 72. In his final years, he was alone and forgotten. But did his legacy remain? Yes, because in 1816, 13 years after Aldini's experiment, something else was happening elsewhere. On the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland, there was a magnificent villa called Villa Diodati. In the summer of 1816, 4 people were staying in that villa. Lord Byron and his private doctor, John Polidori, Percy Shelley and his lover, a young woman named Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin. That summer was a strange one. It is known in history as the year without a summer. Mount Tambora had erupted in Indonesia, and ashes had spread through the atmosphere. In Europe, it rained constantly. They couldn't see the sun. Bored in the villa, these 4 people read ghost stories by the fireplace at night. One night, Lord Byron suggested a contest. They would each write a horror story. Byron made a draft. Polidori wrote a vampire story. But 18-year-old Mary couldn't find any ideas for days. Then one night, everything changed. Byron and Percy were talking about life, death, and the limits of science. They talked about Erasmus Darwin. They talked about galvanism. And about Giovanni Aldini. They recounted Aldini's Newgate experiment, the corpse of a hanged man, the electricity, the opening eye, and the clenched fist. Percy asked, what if he had done more? What if he had truly reanimated him? Mary listened in silence. The firelight from the hearth illuminated her face while the rain poured relentlessly outside. That night, she went to bed but could not sleep. Images began to take shape in her mind. A student kneeling beside a thing assembled from human parts, patches, stitches. And that thing was moving. She opened her eyes, then closed them again, but the images would not leave. The creature was staring at her with yellow, lifeless, yet living eyes. She remained awake until dawn. Finally, she fell into a nightmare and woke up in terror. The next day, she began to write. The first sentence. It was on a dreary night of November. The story was narrated by Victor Frankenstein. A young scientist, obsessive, possessed, reanimating a creature with electricity. But who was Victor, really? Mary was, in fact, holding up a mirror to Aldini. Aldini was obsessed with his uncle's legacy. Victor was obsessed with the ideas of his mentors. Aldini had tried to grant life with electricity. Victor had succeeded. Aldini performed for the public. Victor worked in the shadows. Mary was asking a question. What if Aldini had succeeded? What if the corpse didn't just twitch but stood up, walked, and talked? The answer was chilling. You create a monster. It follows you. It kills those you love. In the end, you die too. But Mary was seeking something even deeper. Who was the true monster? Was the creature born evil? Or was it made evil by society? In the novel Frankenstein, the creature was initially innocent. It was like a child. It watched nature, observed the birds, and took joy in the warmth of the sun. But when humans saw him, they screamed. They stoned him. They called him devil and monster. And so the creature learned a bitter lesson. No one will ever love me. Therefore, I shall hate. He turned to his creator, Victor, and said, "Create a mate for me. I am alone. Create someone like me, or I shall have my revenge." Victor refused. And the creature kept his word. He strangled Victor's brother, murdered his bride, and slaughtered his best friend. Mary's Frankenstein was more than just a horror story. It was a profound inquiry into the darkness of the human soul. It forced us to ask the question, was the real savage creature that giant made of stitches? Or was it the scientist who played God and then abandoned the life he had created to its fate? Mary wrote for months. She meticulously wove together Victor's past, the creature's agony, and every single moment of the tragedy. She finished it in 1817. In 1818, Frankenstein. Or the modern Prometheus was published. The first edition was released anonymously because at that time, it was deemed unacceptable for a woman to write such a work. The book caused a scandal. Some were horrified. Others cursed it, calling it an insult to God. But Mary added this note in the preface. Some parts of my story are based on well-known theories of natural philosophy. She was referring to galvanism, Aldini's experiments. Real science. Did Aldini read Frankenstein? Yes, in 1818, he was 56 years old and still alive. But he never made a single comment. Perhaps he felt pride, perhaps anger, or perhaps fear. Because Mary had held up a mirror he could not escape, an obsessive, dangerous scientist who ultimately prepares his own destruction. Aldini died in 1834. The theory of galvanism had long been debunked, and Volta had been proven right. But Aldini's legacy remained forever, because he had shifted the course of literary history. Frankenstein is now one of the most famous novels in the world. Hundreds of films, thousands of adaptations. The name Frankenstein became synonymous with the concept of the mad scientist, and at the root of it all, the man who made spectators faint in that London hall, Giovanni Aldini. Today we have defibrillators. We restart stopped hearts with electric shocks. In a sense, Aldini was right. Life can be sparked by electricity. But Mary Shelley was also completely right. We must not cross certain boundaries, and we must carry the responsibility of what we create. January 18th, 1803, a corpse, an experiment, a horror, and 13 years later, a novel that changed the world. Victor Frankenstein created a monster. Giovanni Aldini created a legend. Every time you read Frankenstein, remember, real horror stories begin in laboratories. And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who look just like us. I hope you enjoyed this journey. History is filled with such incredible and chilling stories, and I will continue to share them with you. To support me, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment.